Here.
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 Here. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Dixie Wheeler. I'm the president of the Board of Education, and I welcome you to this special meeting of the board. As indicated on the agenda, the purpose of this meeting is to discuss current conditions at the Midland Elementary School building, to receive reports and recommendations from the school district's administration and consultants, and to act upon an educational plan going forward. I want to assure everyone that the health and safety of our children and staff are of the utmost importance to the Board of Education and the district. This evening, we will hear from Superintendent Rolf Sievertson. He will be followed by Ann Skeet. There's a little turnaround here. A lead risk assessor duly licensed by the Illinois Department of Public Health and a member of Ideal Environmental Engineering Incorporated of Bloomington, Illinois. Ms. Skeet has inspected Midland Elementary School, taken specimens for testing, and prepared written reports of her findings. Ms. Skeet will be followed by the school district's architect, Chuck Bennett, who will discuss the projected cost to remediate current conditions at Midland Elementary School and to provide temporary facilities. Mr. Stevenson will then provide the Board of Education with his recommendation regarding Midland Elementary School and his proposed educational plan moving forward. Our regional superintendent of schools, Chris DeVore, is present, and we will provide him with the opportunity to address the board and the public. After that takes place, we will provide the opportunity for public comment, after which I anticipate a motion which will be followed by a second and board discussion prior to any action being taken. If you wish to address the board, please fill out a goldenrod sheet provided on the table where you entered. We will use those sheets to call upon speakers when we get to that point on the agenda. And the other person sitting up here is Mr. Stu Witt, who is from Witt Law, who serves as our attorney. Mr. Stevenson?
I'd like to read a chronology of events and describe and inform the public on how we got to this point. Historically, Midland Community Unit School District 7 was under the jurisdiction of the Regional Office of Education of Region 43, covering Marshall, Putnam, and Woodford County. Effective July 1st, 2015, Region 43 was dissolved. Those school districts in Woodford County came under the jurisdiction of Region 53, along with Tazewell County. Those school districts in Marshall and Putnam counties came under the jurisdiction of Region 35, along with LaSalle County. Our regional superintendent is Chris DeVore. From the beginning of this school year, Mr. DeVore staff contacted Midland to arrange an annual life safety inspection of our district schools. This is done every year. On Friday, January 15, 2016, Mr. DeVore made his annual inspection of our schools, the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. Monday, January 18th was a legal holiday. On Tuesday, January 15th, I reported to the board president Mr. DeVore's inspection and his concern. At this time, on January 15th, Mr. DeVore telephoned me and advised that he would like some environmental testing performed at Midland Elementary School. On the 19th, I called Ideal Environmental Engineering Incorporated and arranged for the testing. On Thursday, January 27, 2016, Ideal Environmental Engineering appeared at Midland Elementary School, conducted certain tests, took specimens, and departed. The specimens were sent for a lab for analysis. As a cautionary measure, we closed school on Thursday, January 28th and Friday, January 29th. While our concern is dealt only with the elementary school, we decided to close all schools to keep children on the same schedule. There was a concern of older siblings not being able to supervise younger brothers or sisters. On Friday, January 29th, we received Ideal's indoor environmental quality sampling and analysis report, as well as its limited lead-based paint inspection and risk assessment report. On Saturday, January 30th, the Board of Education held an emergency meeting as authorized by the Open Meetings Act. At that meeting, it was determined to conduct an inspection of the entire elementary school building. As a result, on Sunday, January 31st, as a cautionary measure, we announced the decision to close all schools on Monday, February 1st and Tuesday, February 2nd. On Monday, February 1st and Tuesday, February 2nd, Ideal Environmental Engineering returned to Midland Elementary School, conducted more tests, took many more specimens, and departed. The specimens were sent to a laboratory for analysis. On Wednesday, February 2nd, as a cautionary measure, we announced the district's decision to close all schools through Friday, February 5th. On February 2nd, we also announced the availability of a free lead testing clinic made available in cooperation with the Marshall County Health Department. Last evening, Ideal Environmental Engineering delivered to the district its lead-based paint inspection and risk assessment report for the entire elementary school building. Since first closing school on January 28th, the district has been working on a contingency plan in the event we cannot return students to Midland Elementary School. We will be prepared to implement the plan if and when we are so authorized to do so by the Board of Education. The district school calendar has 10 snow days built into it. So far, we have used only one snow day. From January 28th through tomorrow, we will use 7 additional days, leaving 2 for future use. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the board at this time for Mr. Stevenson? Ms. Ski, she is the Ideal Environmental Engineering specialist who worked in the building getting samples over the last few days. She has a report, and if I could ask her to please address the board and public.
Sorry. You guys, can I be heard by everybody here? Okay, I'm going to talk to this microphone, address the board, and try to keep eye contact with everybody, but I don't want to have my back to you, so I'm going to go ahead and face them. And if you see me wandering, it's because I don't want you to think that I'm turning my back on you guys out here as well. The district hired me to come in and to assess the Midland Elementary School for the lead-based paint in the building and to determine if there were any hazards present. On February 1st, I went in and conducted an entire building inspection. At that point in time, I went room by room with went room by room into every area to determine whether there was lead-based paint on the walls, the windowsills, things along those lines. To do that, we use a XRF instrument, which is a X-ray fluorescent machine. It's made by RMD, Radiation Monitoring Devices. Now, the XRF that we use will analyze through multiple layers of paint on a wall. The unit that analyzes through there, the readings that it gives us will determine if it's lead-based paint or not. We get an actual reading for that. The specimens that they were referring to that we collected from sites were dust wipe samples. And what that is we go through and we use a damp cloth and we wipe the surface area following the standards that are provided to us by the HUD guidelines and the EPA and the Illinois Department of Public Health. The floor areas that we wipe are a 1 foot square and the windowsills are a 1/4 of a foot squared area. During my inspection of the building, going room by room, we had found additional hazards that were present in the building at that time, not just paint, but also dust. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go over with you what was found on this building. In order for a material to be considered lead-based paint, it has to meet the regulatory standards of being greater than 1 microgram per cubic centimeter. And for dust, it has to make sure for floors that it's above 40 micrograms per foot squared. And on a windowsill, it's got to be greater than 200 micrograms per foot squared. Before I get into what the hazards were, I wanted to talk about people's interpretation of dust. When I say that we did a dust wipe, and it's not that we went into an area and there's 3 inches of dust sitting there and there's dust bunnies. Areas that I wipe, you may look at it, you may not see anything there at that point in time, but that doesn't mean that there's lead dust not present. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through the hazards that were found. I collected over 600 XRF shots of different materials throughout the building. The building components that were tested are plaster walls, wood walls, window frames, window sills. Anything in the building that had paint or varnish on it was tested. Okay. The results of the findings were we had several areas that had lead-based paint. Just because an area has lead-based paint does not mean it's a hazard. Okay. In order for it to be a hazard, it has to be deteriorated, chipped, not intact, or something that can be disturbed by touching, brushing up against to cause it to be a hazard at that point. So if you have a wall that's painted that doesn't have any chipping paint, it can be lead and not be a hazard at that particular moment as long as it's not deteriorated. With my findings through the building, I collected 44 dust wipe samples throughout the building. Out of those, we did find leaded dust on the windowsill in room 213A, 302, room 206, the northwest lobby window, and the window in room 105. The floor areas that out of what we tested, we had the floor in room 111 by the back door, the floor in room 102 under the windows, and the floor in the boiler room on the stairway by the exterior door. Those were the dust samples that came back hot on this for this inspection. Now, we also collected 2 soil samples from the foundation drip line outside, which showed that the soil did come back contaminated with lead. The additional hazards found, you had leaded dust on the windowsills, which I did explain. You had leaded dust on the floors. Now, you had deteriorated lead-based paint on radiators and radiator piping. In rooms 211, 212, 213, the west corridor, the northwest corner where the radiator sits, room 207, room 208, room 205, room 203, 202, 122, 119, and room 110. You had lead-based deteriorated in or on the plaster or wood walls in rooms 210A, the east wall specifically, the north and west walls of what I'm calling the main floor lobby outside the office area. Room 213, the west wall, the southwest lobby, all the walls. The outside of the walls outside of room 301 on the landing area, the north wall. Room 206, all of the walls. Room 213A, the south and west walls. Room 203, the south wall. Room 103, the east wall. And room 110, the west wall. You also had deteriorated lead-based paint on the old window systems, meaning the complete systems that were located in the lower level boiler room and on the stage area and the 2 storage rooms off to each side of the stage. There was lead-based paint found on the window handles in the 1957 edition that was deteriorated. You had lead-based paint on the floor in room 102 that was a hazard. Lead-based paint was found on the windowsills in room 207 and 208. You also had it on the exterior frame beams of the 1957 edition. The old window frames of the 1902 building and the 1904, the exterior completely around the entire building, as well as the window lintels of the 1902 and the 41 edition. You had lead-based paint on the exterior windowsills for the older windows outside the kitchen, the boiler room, and the stage areas. The decorative siding and the eaves, the metal, all 4 sides of the exterior had that, as well as the doors and the eaves of the storage shed. And I said the foundation soil line around the building also had lead-based paint. Those are the hazards that were found during this inspection. There is other lead in the building, but at this point in time, the other lead is not a hazard, being that it is intact and in a condition not causing a hazard. So based on my site work, walking the building, going in and out of every room, these are the hazards that are found at this time. It is my recommendation and the risk assessor that the lead hazards be remediated at this point in time, mitigated, so that I can do a clearance test and say that the hazards no longer exist.
Do you have any questions for Ms. Skeet? Jason?
Yeah, I have a few. So we talk about the hazards, which means those are probably places that oftentimes are probably more obvious. right?
A hazard is any paint that is deteriorated, is at a friction point, that can cause a dust
Right.
at that point in time.
So my concern is, and I'm not saying you're a paint expert, but I'm curious as to if we were just cover up those particular spots, for example, what's to say that 2 feet over, there's not another spot that may not have an issue in another 2 weeks or 3 weeks? That's my concern, is if we, you look at mitigating those specific areas that we found as hazardous, it doesn't keep us from finding other hazards potentially in another week or 2, right? But it's no building that clearly, there's maintenance aspects that are probably neglected. So my concern is, just because you get those hazards, doesn't mean other ones are going to pop up
That
very
is-
soon.
That is
So,
correct. You could have additional hazards that come
I
up.
guess I just want to be clear that I think going in and patching a few spots doesn't necessarily provide that.
Well, I don't think you're talking about just patching a few spots.
No, they have to go in and you have to hire an abatement, a lead abatement contractor to come in and mitigate those areas. We have walked through and we've looked at any place where even if it's not chipped, and literally chipping at this point in time, where it's not adhered to the wall and if it's not adhered to the substrate, at that point to me, you run a risk of it being a hazard. So they need to stabilize that. And the way the report, if you read the entire report at the end, you have to, because you still have lead-based paint in that building, you have to continually monitor that as part of a continual evaluation. The only way to get out of not having to reevaluate the lead in your building is to completely abate the lead and remove it from the building. And what I'm offering are just interim controls to reduce the hazards, the current hazards at this point in time that are an issue.
What about the outside of the building?
The outside of the building, you have deteriorated lead-based paint all the way around the building, on the metal eaves and the older window frames. At that point in time, even if you stabilize everything inside the building, you still need to stabilize that outside for several different reasons. If you open a window, that lead, the dust that's in the air can be blown in. And when I say lead dust that's in the air, it's not literally chips of paint coming in through the windows, and that it's dust that you may not even see by looking at, just looking at the dust. And so you may look at a windowsill and say, oh, that's clean, and then come in and do a dust wipe and send it to a laboratory and have it analyzed, and you may have lead dust because of that. Not only with that, because of the condition of the paint outside, it has contaminated the ground soil as well. And if you walk around the building, which, like I said, I did the other day, you have visible paint chips on the ground. The problem with that is that if somebody walks across that, they can track that on their shoes, bring it into the building, which in return would create an additional hazard. So just, picking one hazard here to fix at a time, you need to fix the whole initial, to get the outside stuff taken care of as well as the inside before I can say that the immediate hazards are eliminated.
So also for, I guess, everybody else in attendance, what would you recommend for reoccurring inspections? How often?
There is HUD has a guideline that at a minimum is annually. Based on the age of your building, that would be something that the upkeep of your building, the condition, if you have, continual water, things along those lines, I would say do it more frequently, but at a minimum requirement is once a year.
All right, can you go into what are the hazards of having this? You're saying it's hazardous, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would you again explain how that's hazardous and how we need to address that?
To address the hazards that you have, you need to get an abatement contractor in to stabilize the material so that it's no longer in a deteriorated condition. For example, if you look at the outside of your building, you have those metal leaves, that is all deteriorated. To eliminate that hazard, you can do what we call an interim control, which is a temporary fix. I mean, it's one of those that will fix it anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the other conditions. Or you can do an abatement option, which removes it. Okay. The hazard that you have with that is it's lead-based paint. Okay, so if you bring that in, if you track it in on your thing, you step on it, you're going to create a dust with it. I mean, coming in contact with it, that's the hazard itself is the deteriorated paint. So to eliminate that hazard, you have to correct the source of the lead falling off the buildings or falling off the wall, the substrate itself. So you need to stabilize that.
Okay, but don't people, right, in their own homes have lead paint?
If your house was built pre-78, there's a strong chance that you probably at one point in time have lead-based paint somewhere in your home. I mean, that's just a standard that's out there. You can go to the EPA's website or even the Illinois Department of Public Health, and they'll let you know that in anything pre-78, lead-based paint was used. So,
General maintenance of the property, that issue is by painting.
yes,
Correct.
upkeeping and keeping it in an intact condition, okay? Lead in an intact condition is not a hazard. Lead dust, you only get the lead dust if your lead-based paint isn't in an intact condition. So, one of the ways to keep from having the hazard would be to keep your lead-based paint in an intact condition.
Okay, but you're saying that this has to be abated in order for the hazard not to be there.
No, it has to be stabilized for the hazard to be reduced. Right now, the hazards that are listed is the paint that can cause lead dust by chipping off the wall, those things. So you don't have to abate it, but you have to mitigate it and stabilize it and make it back into an intact condition so that it's no longer deteriorated, dilapidated, chipping along those lines. So you don't, the difference between abatement and mitigation, abatement is a permanent solution, which means you're removing the lead. The mitigation stabilization, that's going to eliminate your hazard at this condition. So we go through, we stabilize, say, for example, the north wall, you know, in the lobby area there, where it's paint chipping, you go in, the abatement contractor will come in, they will stabilize all the chipping paint so that it's all smooth, they'll put their lead block on for that, and then that hazard itself, the chipping paint is no longer a hazard. There's still lead there, but it's not a chipping hazard that can cause the dust to be cross-contaminated, whether you take it out of the building, home, or whatever.
Okay, use the word mitigation. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Mitigation, mitigation stabilization is where they come in, you have the chipping paint, and that they're going to, depending on the procedure that the contractor uses, it could be a hand scrape, a wet method, a non-abrasive measure. They will come in, and where your paint's chipping on the wall, they're going to come in and take it from a deteriorated condition back to an intact condition by removing the chipping paint off the wall. So mitigation, stabilization, basically, those are our interim controls that are listed in the report. Okay, so in the report, you have interim control options and then abatement options. And the difference, the interim controls are the abatement, or not, excuse me, the interim controls is the stabilization mitigation, whereas the abatement option is the permanent solution, removing permanent enclosures of the deteriorated paint. It's the deteriorated paint itself is what causes the hazard, the condition of the paint.
Any other questions here?
What is the air quality there? Or did you test that?
Are we talking for lead or, I mean, I did a mold sampling prior to that, and there was mold spores found in the air. I mean, that were not consistent with mold spores that were found outside that report is, that's happened. So that an issue. But as for lead itself, lead is not typically airborne like mold would be or another environmental concern, because lead is a metal, it falls to the ground, and they're more concerned with the tracking of the feet and the dust along those lines.
I just had a question on the idea of doing inspection around with other buildings, that we can do is to make sure other buildings are safe. Do we do that?
Can we do that?
Yeah, this is already doing that.
I don't think we're going to that length.
I guess maybe that's a question for, as a board, if that's something that we have to do with elementary school. Curiosity, why would we want to do that for all the school systems?
First, I want to thank you for having me tonight. I know there's an opportunity later on to talk. To address the question, the items of concern were in the elementary building. As I did my inspection on the 15th, I didn't see those areas of concern in either the high school or middle school.
Anything else, Stephanie? You have anything else? go over to Mr. Bennett, who is our architect. So we're wondering if we would have any costs, do you know any costs connected with this?
We did receive a proposal for what was based in Ideal's report from M&O Environmental Company. And this is based on a report that's currently intact. And I just want to kind of talk about that it's the cost for what we know. Anybody who gets into any kind of construction or doing something, when you start to disturb the surface, it could open up more potential hazards, in this case. For example, the outside eaves and the wood on there, we don't know the complete condition of the bottom of the eaves and the wood. It could be rotted, and if there's areas that are rotted, that may open up some other items. But knowing what we know today, the cost for the abatement of the school is $160,000. And a couple things with that. The work really can't be done immediately. The outside work can't be done unless the temperature is 50 degrees and rising. And the reason for that is when they come in and they do the scraping of the areas in question, they then encapsulate those areas with a liquid, what's called liquid lead blocker. And the temperature has to be at a certain level in order for that to work properly. In talking with Ideal about this, they could certainly do the inside of the school right away. But then if you're not doing the outside of the school, there's still chances of taking that material from the outside of the school and bringing it inside the school. So there's a question as to, what timing makes the most sense. So what's the immediate solution for that? Part of the cautious process that we talked about is for this building is obviously not having kids in the building. And how do we keep the area around the building safe? Well, we've already looked into putting a fence around the building at a stipulated distance from the building, which could be probably 10, 15 feet, that's to be determined still. The cost of the fencing around the building is going to range somewhere in the $7,000 to $9,000 range to get that done. It'll be a 6-foot high secure fence, so we keep people away from the building and away from the hazard. That's not to say that we get a gale force wind and it can blow things around. That's that you can't control that. So we're going to do the best we can in order to keep people away from the immediate hazard.
Chuck, can I interrupt just a
Sure,
minute?
absolutely.
Okay. I think you meant to say mitigation, not abatement.
Yes.
You said abatement.
I'm sorry. Well, on their bid, they say abatement. They say companies submit a bid amount and the abatement of the facility. So if that's a
It's used. That would be something that you should clarify with M&O, because abatement costs are typically higher because that's the permanent removal. And when we talked about it with them, it was to get costs for the control.
Okay.
Which would be the lead block and all that,
Right.
and interim control on abatement.
And again, just to clarify, the definition is abatement is getting rid of it completely. Mitigation is taking care of the stabilization of what's there. Okay.
Scraping of the is mitigation, not abatement. I think it was just like
The next important issue here is where are we going to put the kids? And been working diligently with Mr. Sievertson, and he in turn has been working diligently with the teachers to come up with a plan to where we can house the kids. I passed out a diagram, and I know you folks aren't going to be able to read the diagram here. But what we've talked about is the immediate solution would be to house all grades except for 5th grade currently in the middle school. And that's obviously, it's obviously going to be crowded, but we're working out all the details with the ROE to make sure it's a safe environment. And that's, again, that's a major concern. Fifth grade would be located immediately in this school. Now, what we ultimately want to do is free up some more space in the middle school and move the pre-K kids over in the school as well. Part of the big concern would be is, intermixing of those kids with the high school kids. Well, we've come up with a plan to isolate, for lack of a better term, the kids in this general area of the building. There's a current weight room in here, and then another couple other rooms that we would utilize for that. We can't move the pre-K children in here yet because there's some work that we need to do for egress and separation and hallways and access to bathrooms as well. So over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to be getting bids and getting that work done as quickly as possible. So then we can have the solution of having 5th grade pre-K in this building, and then all the other kids at the current middle school. Board have any questions regarding the placement?
Go ahead, Jason.
They do, but they're not necessarily for shops. Some of them are around, some other ones. For instance, Mr. Gauss, the principal of the high school, I'm curious on his thoughts on how they'll work with pre-K kids being in the school and how to take care of. Thinking we have to worry about that.
That's part of the reason why we chose the northwest area of the building, is to where outside of coming in here for PE or going to the bathroom, they would be isolated and they wouldn't have to see a high schooler or anything like that, to be honest with you. And typically, if you talk to preschool, they'll all go together to the bathroom as well. So you know, if we're there out on their own, to the bathroom, but they would be isolated in the northwest section of the school where they would not be anywhere close to the academic wing of any high schoolers.
Don't the preschoolers have to have access to a toilet like close nearby or something? Wasn't that an issue when we talked before about the middle school itself, that it needs restrooms closer for the preschool?
That is a concern, and we're looking at the requirements and focusing on student safety as those decisions are made. And so they have asked for input, and we are working with the correct individuals to make sure that it is going to be safe. Interesting, you think about high school students and then the age difference in your 4-year-olds. And I've seen success from being able to utilize high school students in that capacity. And so it's not unheard of. And you talk about supervision, it's a great opportunity for kids to have an opportunity, that might look at that profession, working with kids later on, to have a chance to work hands-on or kids to do some reading under the supervision of teachers. And so sometimes issues become really good opportunities for kids. Certainly the safety of kids is our concern.
There's a question. In our packet, we have school code, and it addresses outdoor air required. Can somebody address that regarding the windows?
There's the question is, and we researched this immediately when this was coming up, the way the elementary school is designed, there's a certain amount of fresh air required that you have to introduce into each habitable room. Well, older schools, such as that school, that fresh air is gotten from being able to open the windows. So we can't, the question might be is, well, why can't we do the inside, keep the windows closed and have the kids in there? Well, a lot of different reasons why you can't. Number one, the window situation. Number two is also the hazard is still outside, where kids can track it in from their feet and walk it inside. So it's really not an option at this time.
So, we're a bit of an impossible situation here, almost, right? I mean, we're dealing with something that most of us here have never, hopefully, won't have to deal with. We're going to do our best to do what we can to get the kids back to school as quickly, as safely as we can. But under the same token, we need to make sure that they have an adequate learning environment, right? So one of the things, of course, that I'm a little concerned about, and again, we're gonna have to do what we can do. But looking at the plans for the middle school, we see putting in 4 classrooms for the most part beside the gym. I stand here, and I'm curious how we go about doing that without trying to make sure that there's proper noise cancellation or doing whatever so that the kids can actually learn.
Yeah, the display went. Actually, that's a great question, because I asked Rolf the same question as to, you know, the placement of the kids in the school, and the second grade and the fourth grade rooms that are situated in there. So the can up here. Okay. So that's the small gym that Jason was mentioning here. And what these would be is these would be low partitions. You know, they're obviously not going to go all the way up to the ceiling for this. Again, the key there is access and egress for these spaces. And then the grades that are in there, Mr. Severson had talked with the teachers, and they actually suggested arranging it with second and fourth grade so they can interact with one another and take that opportunity as a learning experience.
Well, it would be like 2 second grade teachers and they would teach together.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
So you really kind of combining a couple of those classrooms together, so you have, okay. So you wouldn't have 4 separate learning sessions going on at the same time. That was my concern.
But they're partitioned off, so they are separate, right?
But they're not, unless you physically construct walls and ceilings and everything else, you know, that's the only way to really kind of get it somewhat soundproof. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about, you know, partial height partitions, maybe kind of like in an office environment, 6 feet tall, cordon off the specific areas in order to.
That's what I meant, because they're 6 feet tall.
Can I interject? Certainly, this plan that was developed by the teachers and myself and Lynn Jason, who's the transportation director, and the food service personnel and other administrators, is an interim plan. In order to remove the students from the gym, which would be an ideal portion of this plan, is to secure mobiles. And I think you're going to have to probably look at that. And that is part of my recommendation. I don't see how you're going to put those students back in school. I really don't. So part of this recommendation from me would be to look into authorizing Chuck as our district architect to price mobiles and to give us a time frame on how quickly we can get them on site at the middle school.
I think we have in our board packet, we have information from the health department and recommend, well, from this week, that they deem that the building is not safe. So I mean, that's the authority by what we have to go by. So I think it's our responsibility to act upon that authority. We need to get our kids back in school. So
I feel that if the evacuation plan, contingency plan is deployed, and I've worked with the teachers on this, I feel that we can get the students back in school no later than Tuesday morning.
I would like to reassure parents that these teachers have really worked hard in the past week to come up with ideas to make this the best learning possibility that they can. And I think, you know, our children will be well taken care of by these teachers.
I just have question about moving them once and then moving them twice. You know, we're gonna do this interim plan, there's 4 months left of school, and I'm just concerned about, okay, if they move in here, they get settled, and then in 2 weeks again, we're moving them again. And for some of the little ones, that could be a bit of a stretch. I mean, I'm not saying, I think that if we ever go back into school again, you need to have mobile form regardless of what happens. But I'm just wondering if moving them again with the short period of time of school left is maybe the way we should go. I don't know.
I don't think we're there yet. I think our first thing right now is how do we get them back to school safely, as quickly as we can. So I think that's where we stand now. We're trying to figure out, is that where we are? I think with respect to this meeting is getting to the point where we're figuring out, okay, we look there, do we agree that this is a formidable plan? And that's what we are right now.
Yes, that's where we're right now.
So I'm trying to make sure that we're all.
Yeah. Mr. Burke, do you have anything you want to say?
I had a couple comments. I'll keep it short. I appreciate a number of people in this gymnasium have reached out through email, through phone calls, or even coming and visiting my office. I work for everybody, and this, I understand there's a lot of decisions to be made. What we're here about today is based on those findings and looking to find a safe place for kids. Now, that's the focus. We're here about safety, and we're here about getting kids back in school safely in a timely manner. I commend, as we talk about where do we put kids, when you want to know an answer, you go to those people that work with kids on a regular basis, and the teacher's working hand in hand to say, we think this would work. That's been a great job, and that's been something that certainly is appreciated. The people that are here today in the gymnasium, you care about your kids, and I thank you for that. I think the Board of Education, where they're looking to make those decisions and again make it safe for kids. So I want to reach out and remind us that the focus tonight is really let's find some answers to get kids in school. I'm willing to take questions as needed, but I've talked with a number of you, and I understand where we're at here.
Any questions for Mr. Burke?
I have a question on the timeline of the excavator repairs, or is that going to be covered under your agency?
That will be covered under the architects. He's been coordinating with the abatement contract.
It said in the report, approximately 10 days worth of work inside, 30 days worth outside. But we can't do the outside unless it's above 50 degrees. Can't predict the weather, but this certainly is not a 2, 3, 4 week window we're looking at. It's going to go on a little farther than that.
Right, as we know, the weather in our area is absolutely unknown. I don't think you can probably even consider starting this until mid-April. At the latest. So, you can do the inside while the outside is getting done. So you're looking at, if mid-April is a potential start date, obviously mid-May is a potential end date. So getting kids, if that was the plan to get kids back in that school, that realistically that's not going to happen until next school year.
And after all that work's done, we have to bring in the testing company to recertify, or not certify, test and verify.
Yes.
After the mitigation is complete, stabilization, in order for it to be reoccupied, the state of Illinois requires that you do clearance dust mite sampling throughout the areas that were. Basically, I come back in and do the dust mites in the building to make sure that what they did didn't create any additional areas, and that's a requirement by the state that the floors can be reoccupied. If there's any conditions to change, natural disaster, something along those lines.
So now to be clear, the kids are going to be going back to the elementary, not for the school year. So now it's a matter of what do we do in the interim, what's our short term, right? Our short term now is figure out how do we get them back to school on Tuesday, right?
I feel the mitigate or the temporary contingency plan is exactly what we need to do and act on. I just think with the pending referendum, that will definitely help guide us, because one way or the other, I don't think they'll probably be going back in with cost. It really might not make sense one way or the other, depending on what the voters decide and tell us, give us direction. So I mean, the contingency plan is the safest way to get the kids back in school, get them back learning, get our staff in a safe environment. That's all I have to say. I do have one question about the fencing that I did want to ask. I'm sorry, I apologize for him. About the fencing that's going around the outside, is there going to be allowed to be on the playground? Because there's lead paint on all of those structures that they play on, and a lot of it's exposed. And I'm not saying that I mean, the kids go over there and play basketball, and I mean, they go over there every day. However, that swirly slide and all the other fixtures that are out there, with the exception of possibly that last one that was added, they all contain lead paint. And I'm just, if we're worried about the safety of our students, I'm just asking that question. Yes.
I don't think
It was not tested.
Was that tested? It wasn't, was it?